Hello, Curious, and welcome back. Their names were Christine and Leah Papin, and in February of 1933, they committed one of the most shocking crimes in the history of France. They stripped their victims of their eyes and made their faces unrecognizable, took their lives, and profaned their bodies. This was the fate of a mother and a daughter from a wealthy family where the sisters worked as live-in housekeepers. Why did two young women decide to commit such gruesome acts? And how did they go from being quiet and reticent to becoming ruthless criminals? What tragic events occurred in their lives? And what was their sisterly relationship like? And why was it suspected that they communicated with each other through telepathy? The case of the Papin sisters is unusual, and in some did not treat their crime as a reprehensible crime at all, but it became a symbol of a class struggle. Stay tuned to the end for the details of this unbelievable story. But before we get to it, don't forget to turn on the notifications and subscribe to our channel so that you are always up to date with our Wow Factor videos. There were actually three Papin sisters. The oldest was named Amelia, then there was Christine, and the youngest was Leah. Things were not going well in their family home. In Le Mans, in the west of France, from the moment their first daughter was born, the father was particularly cruel to his children, often with a glass in his hand, and there were numerous arguments and physical fights between the parents. However, this was not the end of the dramatic events in the sisters' lives. The eldest, Amelia, was intimately abused, and because she was still harassed by her father, she decided to leave home and become a nun. For Christine and Leah, the horror did not end, and for the next years, it was they who had to defend themselves from the harassment, and only when their parents decided to divorce, there was hope that there would be peace in their lives. Unfortunately, these were only the appearances, as the sisters were first placed in an orphanage, and then it was determined that they needed specialized psychiatric care, and they were placed in a hospital. While in the facility, however, they were very quiet and peaceful, always sticking together, yet hardly speaking to each other. The hospital staff began to believe that Christine and Leah did not need to open their mouths to talk to each other because they did so by means of telepathy. However, no evidence of this was ever found. Instead, the fact that after several years of confinement, it was decided to release them because they were deemed to be in good enough mental health. After leaving, the sisters found work and were employed as live-in housekeepers at the residence of a retired lawyer, René Lancelin. The man and his family, namely his wife, Leonie, and daughter, Genevieve, lived in a beautiful two-story townhouse in Le Mans. It might seem that serving such a high-ranking family was the best thing that could happen in the lives of the sisters. Unfortunately, once again, fate proved very unfair to them, and the girls were exposed to terrible working conditions. They performed their duties for 14 hours a day and almost never had time off. Their relationship with their employers was extremely strange, as they did not speak to the master of the house and received orders only from his wife, and unusually in writing. Leonie Lancelin was an extremely demanding person, and she demanded perfection from her housekeepers, and it is even said that she suffered from depression, and the Papin sisters became victims of her mental problems. However, they endured all of this with humility. They were shy and close-minded and never complained about their fate. However, the day came when things took a completely different and frightening turn. It was exactly February 2nd of 1933. The sisters were left alone in the household and were doing their daily chores. When one of them at some point plugged in an iron, a short circuit occurred which blew the fuses. The house became dark, and to make matters worse, the lady of the house and the daughter returned from their shopping trip at the same time. She immediately flew in with rage and began shouting at her employees. Christine Papin, however, at this time did not intend to listen to the reprimand with her head lowered. To silence the screaming woman, she grabbed a vase standing on the dresser and smashed it on her employer's head. When her daughter saw this, she immediately lunged at her tackle and a struggle ensued. Christine began calling her sister for help, and after a while, all of the women were involved in a tug of war. The Papin sisters at one point were as if they were in some uncontrollable fit of rage, and it soon became clear that they not only wanted to inflict wounds on the elderly woman and their daughter, but their aim was to take their lives. And therefore they mercilessly inflicted their blows, including using objects that were within reach. Then they deprived their victims of their eyes and attacked them until they passed away from this world. But their brutality did not end there, because they ran into the kitchen to get knives and then used them to inflict wounds on the dead woman. When they had finished, they locked the front door to the apartment building and locked themselves in their bedroom. After several hours, René Lancelin returned home. He was surprised to discover that he could not get inside and was further disturbed by the fact that the entire building was plunged into darkness. So he called the police, and when the officers broke down the door, a horrifying sight appeared before their eyes. Most of the police officers were seeing such a gruesome crime scene for the first time in their lives. Suspicions fell on the young servants, and when they were found in the attic room, they immediately confessed to their actions. So their hands were handcuffed, and after a while, they were behind prison bars. They were then separated for the first time in many years and placed in cells far apart from each other, which clearly affected their mental well-being. Especially the older of the sisters, Christine, took the separation hard. She suffered a nervous breakdown and even tried to gouge out her eyes, and this became an argument for defense, who plead mental health and insanity at the time of the crime during the trial. And lawyers in the courtroom also recounted the women's extremely difficult childhood and the violence they experienced in the family home. Their trial caused a huge stir in the public opinion, and all of France followed it closely. Besides, it also aroused the interest of intellectuals of the time, who did not believe that women were degenerate killers because it was considered that their crime was a manifestation of class warfare. Prominent thinkers of the time even came to their defense, claiming that the girls rebelled against their vile masters and scandalous conditions under which they had to work. So when the verdict came in September of 1933, huge crowds gathered outside the courtroom to see what the fate would be and befall on the sisters. The verdict was a unanimous, and it found the sisters perfectly sane and therefore guilty of the acts that they had committed. It was found that at the time of the crime, they were in what was called a state of joint psychosis through which such a gruesome act of violence had occurred, and it was concluded that Christine was the mastermind behind the entire incident and subjugated the younger Leah to herself. For this reason, they received very different sentences, and Christine was sentenced to be beheaded and Leah as an accomplice to 10 years of hard labor. Since her arrest, the sisters have only been able to speak to each other once, and after which they never saw each other again outside of the courtroom. Although Christine's sentence was eventually changed to life imprisonment, she did not spend much time behind bars. She fell into extreme depression, refused to eat, and suffered bouts of separation from her sister, all of which led unfortunately to her departure from this world in 1937. The younger Leah coped much better with the whole situation. She was released from prison 2 years earlier for good behavior, after which she found her mother and lived with her for the rest of her life under a different name. The crime that the Papin sisters committed has been written in thick letters in the history of French criminology, and in fact has been controversial to this day. It has become the inspiration for many publications, plays, essays, and even songs. Several film productions have also been based on it, including ones such as 1994's Sister My Sister, the 2000's Murderous Maids, and Oscar-winning Parasite, which was named Best Film of the Year by Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Science in 2020. And do you curious know about these productions? Did you realize that they were based on true events? What do you think of this shocking story of the Papin sisters? Have you heard of other brutal crimes committed by women? So please let us know in the comments, and also don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for our next episode tomorrow.